Coming up on the NBA Rundown, we are going to talk about 4 potential landing spots for Giannis. Now, these landing spots would also probably save the Milwaukee Bucks franchise, because as it stands right now, the franchise that is the Milwaukee Bucks is currently 1-5, and at this point, the most positive thing I can actually say about this basketball team is they get to play Utah on Thursday night. They are 1-5, lost to Cleveland at home, go to Cleveland on Monday. After that game, they come back on Thursday night and have the Utah Jazz. Now, we know that Giannis has certainly joked numerous times about wanting to be traded, especially if the organization doesn't do everything that it possibly can do to help secure a title. So I've got 4 potential landing spots for Giannis. We're going to get into that in just a sec. Hey, new to the NBA Rundown, where the hell have you been? Please go ahead and subscribe, and of course, like this video. All right, so 4 potential landing spots for Giannis. I should also point out that the Doc Rivers experiment as a head coach with this Milwaukee Bucks team, quite frankly, isn't really going all that well, is it? Now, the Bucks did bring Darvin Ham to sit next to Doc Rivers on the bench, and we all know how all of the Milwaukee Bucks players love Darvin Ham. So if this continues, if this losing continues, I wouldn't be surprised to see Doc back on television, probably where he belongs at this point, and Darvin Ham elevated to becoming the next Milwaukee Bucks head coach. I do want to also point out, before we get into any of the 4 potential landing spots, the current owner, the person that owns the most amount of the Milwaukee Bucks now, is the good old Jimmy Haslam family. You know, the same people that brought Deshaun Watson to the Cleveland Browns. That family is historic with losing, and I have to say, they are well on their way to accomplishing that as well with the Milwaukee Bucks. Look, I love Giannis. He's averaging over 31 points a game at this point. He's also grabbing over 12 rebounds. I mean, he's averaging 6 assists a game, so he's at 31, 12, and 6. Those are just absolutely fantastic numbers. This show is not ripping on Giannis in any way. I just simply want to talk about the 4 potential landing spots, especially since Giannis has certainly brought up numerous times that if the team isn't serious about winning, he'd want to ultimately be traded. All right, so to the potential landing spots, and I think 3 of these you've already heard of numerous times. Now, you also have to remember that the Milwaukee Bucks currently have no draft picks like for the next 6 years. They're just all gone. There are also some $75 million over this year's salary cap, and we know that Giannis, in the years to come, from a salary cap perspective, next year he's going to make 54. The year after that, he's going to make 58, and then he has a player option for 62. He's currently making $48 million this year. So option number 1 is the Brooklyn Nets, and we know that Nick Claxton and Cam Thomas and Dorian Finney-Smith and a bunch of draft picks, potentially anywhere between 5 and 8 first-round draft picks, could potentially be on the table. That's option number 1. Option number 2 is it doesn't include Jimmy Butler, but it includes the Miami Heat, which is Tyler Hero, Jamie Jaquez Jr., Nikola Jokic, who's terrible, Kevin Love, who should be retired, and just a bunch of other players and a bunch of number 1 draft picks. That is a option that I don't think is actually going to happen. I can't imagine how Giannis and Bam actually work together. Option number 3, being based up here in the Bay Area, I probably hear some variation of this particular option on a weekly basis on the local sports radio shows. Currently, it would be a Jonathan Kuminga, Brandon Podzinski, Trace Jackson Davis, maybe throw in an Andrew Wiggins and a Gary Payton II, and then maybe 4 or 5 first-round draft picks on top of it. Look, as far as I'm concerned, this Golden State Warriors team and the strategy that Steve Kerr is running at this point should not be broken up. If it was just draft picks and maybe 1 or 2 players, then I certainly would consider it at this point. But to give up on all of the young youth that the Golden State Warriors have doesn't make a ton of sense to me. Sure, send him Andrew Wiggins and maybe send him Kuminga and then a bunch of draft picks for Giannis. If you can do that, then you do the deal from a Golden State Warriors perspective. Now, the team that I actually think makes the most sense for Giannis in the long run is actually the Houston Rockets. Now, the Rockets, as we know, have a ton of young talent, and so they certainly have the opportunity to take a Reed Shepherd, who, by the way, isn't getting any playing time at all. They could take a Jabari Smith Jr., who, if you're being honest with yourself, is a bit of a disappointment at this point. You can take a Tari Eason, who's really a nice young player, and maybe a couple other players, and then just trade a bunch of first-round draft picks. I think from a player perspective, that would leave the Houston Rockets still with Jalen Green on their roster. It would add Giannis, and it would add him to the other nucleus that the Houston Rockets actually have at this point, which would ultimately make a lot of sense. I mean, who wouldn't want to see Dylan Brooks and Giannis on the same team? I am just saying. So I think Houston probably makes the most sense, and it also would do a good job in replenishing what the Milwaukee Bucks ultimately need. Now, I think when it's all said and done, Giannis will probably end up in Brooklyn because the Brooklyn Nets just have so many first-round draft picks that they can ultimately just give up on. I've heard OKC a couple times, but I just don't see that happening. You're talking about one of the best players in the NBA, definitely a top 5 player in the NBA, maybe a top 3 player in the NBA, and one Giannis. And Giannis is still young enough where he could potentially bring a championship to any of those teams I just mentioned. All right, I would love to know what your thoughts and opinions are on this. Please go ahead and drop your comments in for the NBA Rundown. I'm Dave DeBaugh, wishing you all a tremendous rest of your sports viewing day.
This is Phoenix.